It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is John Case, Chief Executive Officer of Acumatica. John brings nearly 3 decades of industry leadership in cloud services, software product management, marketing, partner sales, digital promotion, and brand development to his role as CEO. Before joining Acumatica, John served as President and CEO of Unify Square, a leading provider of operations and performance management software and cloud managed services. That business was sold to Unisys. John also spent almost 17 years at Microsoft in a variety of executive-level positions, including Corporate Vice President of Office and Office 365, where he spurred the digital transformation of Microsoft's most successful cloud business, and Vice President of the Worldwide OEM Division in Marketing and Sales, where he jointly oversaw the global distribution and reseller channels for Microsoft. John has his Bachelor of Science in Economics from Williams College and his MBA from the Tuck Business School at Dartmouth. John Case, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks, Brandon. It's great to be here.
Where do we find you on the podcast today?
I am in my office in the corner of my building in Kirkland, Washington, just outside Seattle.
Washington. Nice. Now, the weather in the Northwest typically doesn't change much in the fall, but sometimes you get a little cold snap. Has that happened up there yet?
I think our pivot to the rainy season is upon us. It's starting literally today. We've had a bit of a dry spell, but the rain looks like it's here for the next week or two. So it's normal, very normal up here. I would say.
It stays in for a few months.
And it's cold. Yes,
and it's cold. Yeah, I went to school in Oregon after growing up in Southern California.
That's right.
It was a great place to be to study, but nice place to visit every now and then. I prefer the sunshine. I'm down in Florida today, and great to talk to you. Literally, almost from the opposite side of the country. Wonders of modern technology. But what we want to do, as we all do with all our guests, is really kind of start with your early years and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like, John.
That's great. Yeah, no, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so not far from where you are in Florida. I grew up there, with a very Southern family with, grandparents, aunts, uncles, you name it, all around. And I was the big traitor for leaving the South to go to the Northeast for college. So that was the last time I lived there was in the late 80s.
It sounds like you lost your twang as well, or did you never have one?
It does occasionally reemerge when I go back for a day or two, but it's mostly gone, I would say. Yeah, you'll hear some ain'ts and some other words occasionally, but other than that, no, it's been pretty much wiped out.
What did mom and dad do?
That's a great question. My dad was an actuary, worked at different companies building things like pension plans. And then when he was about 50, he left corporate life and went and bought a small hotel up in the mountains, which he ran for 20 years. He's now retired. My mom, during that entire period, was a social worker and focused on childcare in low-income neighborhoods, housing projects, Native American reservations, and I used to go with her on some of those outings. So she's got she's literally testified in front of Congress and things like that about childcare for low-income families and neighborhoods.
Wow, awesome. Great way to give back. Siblings, did you grow up with brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, several years younger than me, who lives in Asheville, North Carolina.
Got it. So he didn't get too far from home.
No, he did not. I'm the one that apparently doesn't want to go back home and have gone to different corners of the country.
Thinking back with, it's kind of interesting, the actuary, then going into entrepreneurism and mother doing social work. What are some of the key lessons and things that you remember from mom and dad during those early foundational years?
No, it's very interesting. I think, first of all, they're very different depending on the person. I think my mom was always very interested in her church, and that sparked a real interest in childcare, which started at our church. And then she branched that out into realizing she could really be like a help. And she worked for different foundations and organizations that focused on children and children's rights. It was very influential to me. Still, a lot of the causes I personally support are around, kids like foster care kids and kids who have developmental challenges, kids who really can't advocate for themselves. Yeah. And so that I learned very much from her. And she, would go door to door in places like a housing project and tell them about the free childcare she just got set up at the church down the street. And I occasionally went along on some of those, and that included food drives and fundraising and all kinds of things. And that was very much her personal mission in life. And even after she retired, she ran the childcare at her little church in North Georgia, where she lives now, where my parents live now. So like that was a very much a lesson for me in like what communities are really like and what neighborhoods are really like, and how there's different people of all types and economic situations, and really being respectful of that, and seeing how you could contribute. My dad was, I guess, again, in corporate America. He worked at places like Coca-Cola, which everyone in Atlanta works at Coca-Cola at some point, and other companies like that. And then I think he reached a point where he sort of said that was enough for him. He'd done the corporate life, wanted to have more control, wanted to run his own business, and that's how we ended up. My parents bought this hotel, again, about an hour outside of the city, and then ran it for 20 years, and only just retired a few years ago. Wow. But for him, it was about, taking his life and what he wanted to get out of it, what he wanted to control, where he wanted to see himself, as opposed to answering someone else's orders.
Did they live on property there at the hotel?
They lived on the property. I would go there in the summers and live on, like, there was like a big building in the center. It was actually, I call it a hotel, but it was really like an assortment of cabins in the woods.
Resort.
And there was a big building in the middle. The downstairs was kind of the office and the store, and the upstairs was their home.
Yeah, cool. So some entrepreneurial blood running in those veins as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Cool. Any other influencers, coaches, teachers, things that you, remember that inspired you during those younger years? Yeah.
I mean, probably far too many to count, but I think that, some particular ones I had, an aunt who I was very close to, who was sort of like a second family, who, really was an influential person in my life, thinking about academics, thinking about growth, thinking about community service, and she was very much a part of it for me. And then there were a handful of teachers I remember. I went to a school in Atlanta that was a very high academic achieving school, and they pushed me very hard. I think if they hadn't pushed me the way they hadn't, I probably wouldn't have gone to the colleges I went to and the jobs I've gotten. And I think they saw potential in me early on, and they pushed me, and I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Were you a good student?
I was a very good student. That doesn't always mean you're good at your job. You know what I mean? Like, those are different skills. But no, I was a very good student, and a good test taker, all those kinds of things. So I had those advantages. But I think that part of that comes naturally. Part of that is, are you just by nature a good learner? But then there's also, do you apply yourself? Right. And I think that's a journey that I think that balance is something we all have to strike.
Did you get involved in other outside activities in school? Sports, music, theater, debate?
Many, but I would say primarily of a couple types. A lot of sports. I was mostly played soccer through high school and a little bit after, but I was also into many other sports like golf, and I'm a cyclist and a bunch of things like that. So I had a whole bunch of activities there. And then I would say there was a bunch of community service activities that I did. Habitat for Humanity I was very involved in, which of course is from that area of the world, and some other things that kind of were my outside sports and school focus.
Right. Well, obviously, former President Carter from Georgia.
Exactly.
Very involved in Habitat.
He was my governor growing up.
Yeah, right. And got very involved in that over the years. His dear wife, Rosalind, just passed a couple of days ago. And he's 99 years old, I think now.
Amazing. It's an amazing family and an amazing story.
Yeah, awesome. What about entrepreneurial things? Did you take any of Dad's things, or the DNA in that regard? Have the paper route,
sure,
Christmas cards at Christmas or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, many things. I mean, I had it's a great question, actually. I didn't think about that. I was the neighborhood lawnmower for a whole bunch of houses in the neighborhood. I was I babysat for several families. But then by the time I was in high school, I was mostly a soccer referee, which is hilarious to think about now. But, I refereed kids' soccer games for 15 years, and that's how I made money on the side. So all that was, various ways of kind of getting some independence, if you can think about it that way.
Yeah.
And which my parents were very much into. Like, I had to buy my own car. I had to do like a lot of things like that, where they felt like independence was a life lesson they wanted to give me.
Right, right. Was there this kind of inspiration that, hey, you got to put money aside for college too? That's important. Was there a savings element growing up?
Yes and no, but not in the way exactly you framed. My dad made it clear, like, hey, look, we've done okay, and I'll pay for your college, but anything you can earn in scholarships, I will give you as effectively your own starting, fund.
Yeah.
So, that made me very interested in doing that, obviously. So, went aggressively after academic scholarships and other things that sort of supplement, the fact that they were very graciously able to pay my tuition and room and board and books and whatnot. And it wasn't until I was in college that they left Atlanta and moved to this hotel that I was talking about.
Got it.
What was interesting is then coming home and spending a summer there, and helping him run that business. I got involved in his books, and I understood how he did reservations and how he did advertising, and that was very educational too, because I was getting this kind of in school learning, but then it was coming home and seeing kind of what it was like to run a small business, which is just a very fascinating and different life.
Did you do W-2 jobs while you were in college and high school?
Several. I worked at some software companies, ironically, which at the time I didn't think was even a possibility. I worked at a rental car office and washed cars one summer. There's a whole long list of those. And then I actually did jobs when I was in college. I worked in the library. I worked as a tutor, a whole bunch of things like that, where, I think there was a very frequent, you thinking back on it now, I didn't think I was working that hard, but thinking back on all the number of things I was doing, it was a significant number, and those things added up, and they all give you relevant life experiences.
Well, you decided to go to Williams. Great city. It was actually a great college and great city, Williamstown. One of my daughters, who actually went to Dartmouth, who we talked about, and rode crew there, was recruited by the crew team at Williams. I love that crew. I remember going, around the campus and having a townie student that kind of gave us the tour, and I just fell in love with that place and the great stories around it. How did you make that selection? That's a big change from Georgia.
Very.
And, particularly the winters, I'm sure, which were, quite alien to you, having grown up in more of the southeast.
Yeah, because it's both in a very rural place, many hours outside of Boston, and actually a very cold place, as you're pointing out. I think the private school I happened to go to was very academically focused, so there was a big push to get top students to top colleges, and that was, again, not something that a lot of kids had exposure to, which was great for me. There was definitely a push towards a select set of colleges that they had a good, strong pipeline into, of which Williams was not one. But when I did my tours and I did my interviews, my parents, again, supported me in that and took me up there to see those colleges and whatnot. And sure enough, that's the one I fell in love with. Yeah. And so when they offered me admission there, it was a very easy choice. I think I felt like I wanted to go to a smaller college because I felt like it would be more personal, and I felt like I wanted to go somewhere outside of a big city, because I felt like I was going to be in cities for most of my life, and various reasons, work, whatever. And I thought this was a chance to really kind of have a more pastoral environment, and that probably was more coincidental than it was planful, but that is how it happened. And ironically, my son is now making his own college choice. He's making the exact opposite choice, which is he wants a big university in a big city. So it's interesting to sort of see how the apple sometimes does fall far from the tree. But that was how I ended up there. And I think there'd been one or two students from my school that had gone there before, but it was definitely out of the ordinary.
Right.
And that actually felt good to me. I actually liked that idea.
Yeah, cool. And you studied economics.
Did.
Tell me about some of the courses you took outside your major, and were there any learnings that you took away from those?
Yeah, well, I was intending to kind of be an economics and math major, and then when I studied abroad my junior year, I couldn't do both majors, so I had to pick one. So I did a lot of math as well, but I also continued language studies. I took German there. I did a lot of work in art history, which I found fascinating. I'd never really had any exposure to. I found that very interesting and really fun. Took philosophy courses, psychology courses, political science courses. The whole benefit of that kind of liberal arts education is you can get exposure to things that wouldn't necessarily be in your day-to-day life. Economics, was more theoretical there than it was practical. So you're studying, demand curves and macroeconomic, variables and whatnot. So I can still relate today to, what's in the news about interest rates, but right. It isn't like that's entrepreneurship either. Like, you're not really getting that exposure at that kind of college. So you had to, again, do things outside the school that were more about work and roles. But the school itself, again, I think my study abroad year, I spent a year at Oxford. My study abroad year was probably the most influential experience I had in college because it was such a different environment. I got to see a different kind of student and a different kind of university, and saw how things were taught differently, and was able to study, Anglo-Saxon history, and was able to study, the works of Italian authors. I mean, things that I just wouldn't have done at Williams. So
Yeah.
that was great for me too. I ended up getting to go to two different universities effectively,
Right.
and greatly valued that.
Yeah, it's lovely. And you worked for a couple of years before you went on to Tuck and got your
Yep.
MBA. Tell us about what that first job was and coming out of.
Yeah. I think some of those colleges have this path where you go into things like management consulting and investment banking, and I didn't know any better, and so I did the management consulting route, and worked at a company called Monitor Company, which is very similar to like a Bain or a McKinsey,
Right.
and now doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by Deloitte many years ago, but it was kind of a boutique consulting firm, a couple hundred people, did work for massive companies all over the globe, and for me, it was both, a prestigious job, which was interesting, but I thought of it more as kind of this business, like almost introduction to what global business was really like. Because I got very little of that at Williams by design. And so that job allowed me to do it. And, they're not looking for people that have, especially starting jobs, not looking for people that have great history and background. They want people who have intelligence and smarts and are able to go off and chase things. But in the course of doing that, I not only worked for giant companies. I got to live in Asia for a year. I spent a year traveling around Africa, again for work. So I had these really interesting kind of corporate experiences while being a consultant, and I think that was a great 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I was ready to be done with that. Like that was enough. Like I think that kind of exposure it's super educational. Like you learn a ton, but then you realize quickly, if you're like me, that what you want to actually do is own a problem and be an operator. And that was more compelling to me. So I loved being an advisor. I got a lot out of that, but at some point the learning was going to expire. And so that was my first role, kind of 3 years doing that. And that was fun.
Yeah.
But I left there. There was actually a year in between. I left there to go work at a telecom startup, before business school, because I needed another experience. And I actually intentionally declined business school, and then didn't think I was even going to go, and went and did something else. And that something else ended up, becoming part of a bigger company, and it wasn't great fun, but that was also very useful for me, having two experiences prior to business school.
So you kind of had vaguely in your mind that you'd go back and get your MBA
at some point. Yeah, at some point. That was always my thought.
What was kind of
the thing a year sooner than I thought, or 2 years sooner than I thought?
What was the trigger experience when you kind of said, okay, now it's time?
Time to leave that company, or
time to go back and get time to go back.
Yeah, I mean, it was always sitting there as a thing I wanted to try, and I think again, some of those things are just you see your peers doing something and you think that's normal, right, which is always a learning. But for me, I left consulting, went to this small company, and the team I went to work for eroded very quickly, and it got purchased and moved up into a bigger thing. And the company eventually now is Verizon. It was called Bell Atlantic back then. I was in a very startup part of it, and it wasn't the experience I wanted. Yeah. And so as I thought about, okay, a year later, I was in a kind of a toxic work environment, big kind of corporate America work environment that wasn't healthy. And I thought, what would I go do? And I could have gone and got another job, but I thought, no. This experience has been educational. I now want to go to business school and see it. And the trigger was when the people I went to work with all were leaving too. There kind of wasn't the community of the team I wanted to be in, and it wasn't the right environment for people who worked and thought like I did. And so that was it. It was easy to leave. The question was then, what were you going to go do?
Culture is so important, isn't it, John?
So important.
And when you're young in your career, it's kind of hard sometimes to see that.
Yeah.
But I think for our listeners that are, kind of in that early stage of their career, if it doesn't feel right, it ain't going to change.
You often know. One of the things I coach people on all the time is you often know in your gut or in your heart what the right decision is. Sometimes it's hard to make that decision, but more often than not, you get it right. And so trust that instinct is something that I talk about a lot with people.
Yeah, I love that. So why Tuck? Why Dartmouth?
I think, first of all, it felt a lot like the kind of business school version of Williams College, right? Yeah. So smaller university, kind of out in the woods, whatever, which I quite liked. But second of all, I think it was, at the time especially, and still to some extent the case, it was a rigorous environment. Tuck was intentionally trying to teach like computational skills and math skills and economic skills, and it was intended to be rigorous. It was not intended to be a 2-year kind of stint of community. It was meant to be a rigorous, and that appealed to me at the time.
Right.
And I think that was true. I think we took very serious econometrics classes and learned a lot about how to do math calculations for things like option values, detailed things that probably today would be more automated, but at the time that felt compelling to me. And but I also liked the size, and I liked the community, and I liked the environment and the location and all those things. I love Dartmouth. I love going back there.
Great
And
community.
it's a great place. Yeah, I love it. And if I were again, I would have loved to push my son to a school like that, or one of my next son. Maybe I will, but that's not what his interests were. But that to me felt like a very welcoming and thriving academic environment.
Right. And Dartmouth led you to Microsoft, is that right? I mean,
That's right.
Yeah, right. So that was a direct job you took coming out, or was there a bit of a path before you moved up to Washington?
I did a summer internship at Microsoft first. So they came and recruited on campus for summer interns, and I sort of felt like, hey, I already had the idea that I wanted to get into the technology world. This is the late 90s. So really sort of students like me were only just beginning to explore what life would be like in, sort of the tech world. Now it's obviously this super well-known path, but in the late 90s, it was not.
Yeah.
And so I sort of felt like a Microsoft summer internship, like summer in Seattle, like what could be wrong with that? So I interviewed for it and luckily got it. And and then had a good enough summer that they offered to let me come back. And that's how that happened. So yeah, I spent a summer here before I lived here. And summer in Seattle, if you've spent here, is basically the most perfect environment Beautiful. You can possibly imagine, and it looks nothing like the environment in November.
It's a lot like Scandinavia that way. It changes.
It's a great recruiting tool. Yeah.
Now, was it Ballmer or Bill at the helm those days?
Bill was the CEO, and Ballmer became the CEO not long after.
Yeah, got it. And the Northwest stuck to you. Obviously, you've been there ever since. And again, tell us a little bit about the selection process of Microsoft. The internship obviously was a great experience, but big company, and obviously grew a lot during the 16 years I think you were there. Is that about right?
Yeah, I was there almost 17 years. Yeah, from 99 to 2016 roughly. I think again, it was very easy to go there for the summer, because it was just such an easy, obvious thing to try. And I had no tech kind of credential. And so then it was very easy to say, I talked to 10 or 20 other tech companies my second year of business school about full-time roles. And I just couldn't ever decide if they were the kind of environment I would want, or if they would even survive. Like some of them were very small, fly-by-night kind of startups. And I sort of thought, okay, this Microsoft thing, I loved it there, liked the people I met, loved Seattle, would find it, why would I at least go there for a couple of years and learn about the market before I picked another company? So that was my original model. My original model was go to Microsoft, work there for a couple of years. And I was in product management, which I quite like, and was in product management in some interesting parts of the company. And then I got to do more. And so the thing about that 2 years was it as I either performed well or got lucky or both, they kept giving me more cool things to do. So, I got to pick some fun stuff. I got to try, I worked on the developer platform for a long time. I worked on kind of the future of our server tools for a long time. I got to work on, what was happening with our device sales and phones for a period of time. Like I ran a sales team. They kept giving me more options to do things. And the advantage of a big company like that is, again, if you're successful and you can thrive in that environment, you get opportunities to do very different kinds of things. It feels fresher than just saying you're there for 20 years. Yeah. And so my last 2 jobs there were, one was running a global devices sales team where I was going mostly to emerging markets to talk to very small companies about doing things with Microsoft. And then the next one was running the global Office business, sort of sales and marketing side for Office, a $32 billion business. You don't get many chances like that. Right. So that was yes, it was a big company, and I eventually tired of that in a bunch of ways and probably stayed a few years longer than I meant. But at the same time, I kept getting really interesting things to do. And that's really what drives me personally.
Yeah. Did they give you leadership responsibilities pretty early on there?
Yeah, I would say, I started as a team of one, and probably within 5 years was managing 30 or 40 people. And then I think my last role was several hundred.
Yeah.
So, and that again, some of that's just luck at the right place, right time. But some of it is, are you proving that you can handle that kind of responsibility and that kind of decision making?
Right.
And so, I proved it enough that they kept giving me more options, more
What were
things
some
to
of the
try.
what were some of the challenges, John, that you faced when you first started managing people?
Managing people is so interesting. I had done it a bit when I was in consulting, so prior to
Mm-hmm.
business school. So I had managed a small team of 3 or 4 people through a couple projects, and so I'm glad I had that. I think at a place like Microsoft, what you find is you have different types of people with very different skill sets. Consulting was very homogenous. Skill sets. It's all sort of general business interested people. You get to Microsoft, and you might be managing an engineer, you might be managing a support person, you might be managing someone that just does sales, and you kind of have to learn to think about how to manage different kinds of people, and you quickly have to develop your own kind of philosophy and style in terms of how you want to manage. Um, Microsoft is very prescriptive too, which is I think good and bad. Prescriptive in terms of the way they do rewards, prescriptive in the way they do job descriptions, you name it. So you have to find a
Right.
comfort zone between that prescriptive work, which feels very big company, which it is. It is a big company, and then kind of how you can humanly connect to people. I mean, one of my strong beliefs is that I want to connect to every person that works for me on a human level. I want to understand what makes them tick, what their style is, how they want to fit in to a bigger process. And that you can start with that with 5 people and think about your team that way. And then when you get to 500 people, it's the same. You might not know everyone as deeply or at all, but you're still thinking about, do you treat each person kind of again on that kind of personal level as opposed to making sure everyone fits into a box that you believe. And that's
Yeah.
the way I manage now. Even now, that's the way I manage.
Over the course of your career, and specifically during these years at Microsoft, was there, mentors that you sought out and people that kind of helped you along the way, and as well as did you mentor others? Was that part of the cultural environment there and what you thought was important to succeed?
Massively, yeah, massively. I think there were both mentors for me, much more senior people than me who were coaching me as to how I could grow my career. But I'm a very active mentor in multiple directions. I really like talking to people who have uh, interest in growth and learning and want to improve and want to understand what their gaps are and helping them think through that. And so I think when I left Microsoft, I still have several dozen people I would consider mentees. Some are very active, like I talk to them once a quarter. Some I don't talk to for a couple of years. But Microsoft has both formal and informal systems for that.
Right.
Formal in that certain people of certain types of performance are given formal mentorship, and I was in that program as a mentor. But also then I sort of collect a set of people either that maybe used to work for you or one of your peers recommends they get to know you or something. You have some common interest. And I still talk to many of those people even now, 8 or 9 years post Microsoft. I'm still talking to a lot of those individuals about their careers, about what
Awesome.
they're trying to do, about their growth. Not helping with their job, not helping with a specific task, but more like what are your goals, ambitions? What are you trying to learn still
Yeah.
at this point in your life? Very active program in that way.
Now you said almost 17 years there, or about 17 years,
Yeah,
and
about
you
that. Yeah.
didn't know if you left too early or too late, but you went on and have had actually a previous CEO role prior to
That's
your
right.
current at Acumatica. Was that a hard decision to leave at that time?
Um, in retrospect, it probably was. It didn't feel that way at the time. I felt like I was probably ready to leave Microsoft a few years earlier, but
Mm,
the role I had was so compelling and interesting that I just couldn't, that it was the right thing to do to stay.
yeah.
The company was then going through a set of kind of functional changes that didn't feel as appealing to me. I was in these general management roles where I could really kind of manage a left to right business. And that was less and less true. Response was being pulled away from some leaders and put in functional teams, and you would lose your PR team or your website team or your whatever team, and you would have to go work with other people to get minor things done. And it just didn't appeal to me as much. I certainly could have stayed. I had options to stay, but the role that I was in was no longer kind of one that I exactly would have wanted. And so that allowed me, and I took a sabbatical, which one of the things that used to get to at Microsoft was occasionally take a sabbatical. I'd never taken one in 17 years. So I took one, and through that process, both myself and the company kind of came to this conclusion, like, hey, it probably is the right time for you. And
Yeah.
so I very happily stepped away. And and without another job lined up, I had been interviewing for some roles on the sabbatical, but none of them felt right, and just happily stepped away and realized I could do that for a while. And then I ended up taking 10 months off to find my next job. Like I was very intentional about not working for a period of time and letting my brain process what I'd gone through and process what I wanted to do next. And I'm very glad I did that. It was actually very valuable for me to have done that.
And that became Unify Square. Now, did you go there as president and CEO, or did you come in a C-suite position? And
No, I came in as CEO. Yeah, no. So one of the things that I hadn't talked about with you is when I was at Microsoft, especially the last 5 years I was there, I'd done a lot of angel investing, startup investing, and had gotten much more involved in kind of the startup community,
Right.
and so had some connection there. Unify Square, I did not have any connection to, but I'd given a lot of thought to what small companies looked and felt like. And that was a nice balance for me with what was going on at Microsoft, the giant company level. And Unify Square was a company I was somewhat aware of at Microsoft. It was a bit of a partner of the company, and particularly one of the businesses I worked in. And probably about 6 months after I left Microsoft, the board of that company reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're looking for a new CEO. Would you consider that?" And so that became that role. And I actually both invested in the company, became one of the largest investors in the company, and took over the company at the time. And it was a bit of a turnaround. So it wasn't like a high-flying startup. It was a bit of a turnaround. And that appealed to me at the time.
Yeah.
But it was also a really good chance to break into the CEO job, because those are hard to break into. It's not an easy thing to get. And so that was a really useful, moment for me. And again, I started talking to them probably 6 or 8 months after I left Microsoft. I, at that point, had decided to cut off all communications with large companies. I'd been in interview loops with the Salesforce and Amazon, Google. I just decided that wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And was going to find something kind of small to mid-size when that came to me.
And then that company was sold, I guess, successfully to Unisys, and then
That's
not
correct.
too long thereafter onto Acumatica. And you've been there about almost 2 years, right?
Almost, yeah, a little more than, but yeah, about 1 year and 3/4 thereabouts. Yeah, that's
Tell
right.
us a little bit about what you folks do.
Acumatica is a cloud ERP company. So we make business management software for small mid-market businesses. And these are companies, call it, 20 to 500 employees. Maybe they're 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 million in revenue. And it's kind of an underserved market segment. And you can think of ERP as things like SAP or, IFS. These are companies that sell to giant multinational corporations. And you think of small businesses that run accounting on things like QuickBooks, where there's really kind of an underserved segment in the middle. And that mid-market segment is massive. It's all over North America. And they don't have many, I would call, tools that are custom built for their kinds of environments and their kinds of needs. Yeah. So Acumatica is a business software solution for those kinds of companies. They can run their accounting on us, but also things like their inventory and their warehouses and their manufacturing. And it's expressly written for that customer demographic size. And we are a very fast growing company, about 10 years old, or sorry, a little more than 10 years old, and one that's rapidly, kind of becoming a major force in ERP and business management software.
It's a great market sector to work in. We shared this a little bit because our
That's right.
search practice is also focused on middle market. And, it's fun. They're privately held companies, a lot of sole proprietorships, family-owned businesses. And, it's just kind of about having fun making money, right? They're out there serving their customers in such a way. And, wow, what an amazing technology to bring to them, because I know, how undeveloped, I guess is the right word, so many of their practices and processes are. That's fabulous. How many employees today?
We will be approaching 700 employees this year.
Wow, fantastic, great. And did you take over from a founder, or they'd had an outside CEO before you came in?
Well, no, a little bit of both. One of the founders is still here. He's the CTO of the company, but he was never the CEO. But he's still here, just down the hall from me. And the CEO I took over from was employee like number 50. So he wasn't quite the founder, but he'd been here for 8 or 9 years, and he was ready for his next, kind of phase of life. And so for me, coming off of a successful company sale and having kind of done that, finished that process off, this is a very good fit. And so I'm here to kind of take the company to the next phase of growth. So I was, roughly employee number 500 thereabouts, right? Wow. And those are interesting milestones to think about for any company like ours.
How would you say your leadership style has evolved over time, Tom?
How has it evolved? I mean, I used to think it was all about me solving problems. Like when you come out of these universities and academic environments, it's all about, are you the smart guy? I think now I'm much more about people. I'm much more about culture. I'm much more about the team. And I think that is the secret to any good executives, much less CEOs' success, is how good are you at attracting and enabling and inspiring people, because they are much better at their jobs than you would ever be in their shoes. And I think that is a realization that all of us get to eventually as we get older. I think I got to it fairly early. It was a big part of my Microsoft career and success. But I think that my style is very much one where I want people to feel like I'm managing them and optimizing for their unique growth and talent and how they fit into a bigger whole. And I don't think I was quite as clear about that, maybe 10 years ago as I am now, but it's very much now how I think we will succeed.
What do you think is most unusual or perhaps unique about Acumatica's culture?
Our culture. Well, I think what's interesting and unique about our culture is that we are, first of all, very community centric. When I say that, what I mean is we are a company of a certain size, but we have hundreds of partners and thousands of people around the world that are selling and supporting and building Acumatica. So it doesn't feel like us. It feels like we're a huge entity of a community of individuals, and we relish that. We want to thrive on that. And I think that is something that our partners are very much attracted to. Many of whom have come from other software companies or other even ERP publishers and had a very negative experience. We feel like we want them to have a very positive experience. And so here, what are we? We are positive. We are enthusiastic. We want people to be successful of all types. We want our partners to be wildly successful, and we optimize our business for that. And our theory is, if we can create that leverage point with our community, our channel, our developers around the world who work on our platform, third-party developers who work on our platform, we can really be much bigger than the sum of our own parts. And that's really is the secret to our growth, is that community. And I think that is, a lot of companies say that, but it is very much our lifeblood. And it was very apparent to me about a week into the job how deeply held that belief is and how important that is to the company, how that is basically our secret to success.
Company culture really does permeate from the corner office and the C-suite.
Agreed.
How do you do that? You got 700 employees globally, nationally. I mean, you're dispersed, I'm sure, certainly nationally. And today with obviously a lot of remote work and people in hybrid positions, how do you go about doing that? What's your secret sauce in getting that message across?
No, I'll give you some facts that you won't believe how complex it is. Yeah, about so that number of people, about 2/3 are in and around an office, and about 1/3 are fully remote. Of those 2/3, we're coming in 1 or 2 days a week. So it's not like we don't mandate attendance. So yeah, culture is a very hard problem. And I actually think when I got here in the middle of COVID, frankly, our culture had atrophied to some extent because we had hired a bunch of people that had no connection to other people and didn't know the company. And so I went on a very intentional both travel, journey to every part of the world where we have people, and I'll tell you that list, and you won't believe it in a minute. But also meeting as many people as I could. Like I had a very intentional 60 or 90-day plan to rally folks, get them to kind of be more present and aware of each other, set up kind of global environments. But I'm also then very reliant on the leadership of the company to do that too. So I need the sales team to have a very strong culture. I need the marketing team to have a very strong culture. So I need those individuals to care about it as much as I do. Our people are like, I'm here in Kirkland, but it's a relatively small office, maybe 10% of our team. We have a similar size office in Columbus, Ohio. We have about double that number of people in Montreal, Canada. Wow. We have about a similar size office in Sri Lanka. And we have another similar size office in Belgrade, Serbia, of all places. So we are very geographic. And then that doesn't even include, I have a small team in Southeast Asia and a small team in Latin America and other places. Yeah. So you think about those remote people all over the US and Canada. Our customers are mostly in the US and Canada, mostly. Right. But we have individuals working all over the world on our product, in our support team, on professional services, all those kinds of things. So yeah, I've been to each of those offices, in some cases multiple times. We host a really large customer summit once a year in January, and we bring as many of those employees to that summit as we possibly can. But we're also of a size where we can't have one company party with everybody at it, especially with that dispersion. So I do things like all hands meetings every 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep.
I'm a very informal person when it comes to communications. I want people to reach out to me, even if it's on a text or an email or a Teams chat or whatever it is. And so I get a lot of individuals that come to me that way, but I can only do so much, right? I actually need the best people at the company, the ones that are the most important leaders, to be carrying that same message and that same culture. And I think we actually have that right now. We're very lucky to have that right now.
John, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire at Acumatica?
Yeah, and I think hiring, I would separate that in two categories. There's a hiring category, what are you looking for? And there's absolutely a investing in category. Like those are often different things. Hiring, every role has a balance of individual expertise, which is important in some cases. You're not going to hire a software engineer to go be your accountant. So you need some individual expertise. But at the same time, do you fit into the way the company culture will work? Do you have the openness? Do you have the integrity? Are you someone people will want to work with? We take those matters very seriously. Most of my interviewing that I do personally, I'm not even thinking about the individual capability of the person. I'm assuming that by the time they've gotten to me, that's been settled. I'm thinking about, do they fit into our culture? Yeah. That is the number one thing I'm hiring for. Once they've checked the box on technical capability. And the culture is, again, do I think they would be someone that I'd want to work with? Will rally people around them, can get, people of disparate, kind of styles and cultures to work with them. And I think that is just a massively important problem. And then I think you talk about investing, you get certain individuals who are very good as teams of one and want to be unique, high individual contributor, successful people. I love that. I don't think everyone needs to be a team leader or a manager. Right. I love people that have really important skills, but don't aspire to being a director of whatever and having 100 people on their staff, because I think that's a different skill set. So I look very carefully at someone and I think, okay, does that person want to be suited to have the natural inclination to be a leader, a manager? Or do I want to invest in them as an individual and think about their individual skills and the impact they can have in a deep way across all kinds of things without worrying about the responsibilities of management? I think those are equally important jobs, and you got to really kind of help people sort themselves to some extent.
How do you kind of, get at that? Talking about the investment side, because that's people obviously that have been with you for a while. Is it observation? Do you have a couple of questions that you ask? How do you kind of get under the skin?
Well, it's easier to observe people that you work with. Like when you're in the team, when you're in the company, you can sort of see, is that person able to communicate? I mean, communication is such a core part of it. Can they persuade? Can they inspire? And you might have someone with the best ideas that can't always persuade others to follow those ideas. Right. It's much harder in an interview. Like an interview, there's by nature you're going to get a lot of them wrong, because when you do an interview like that, you find yourself often assessing someone's history. You ask them about, what are some examples of moments that you had where you had to inspire, persuade, communicate, and you can hear those examples. Until you really see it in action, sometimes it's hard to assess. And I think interviewing is a great, important function, but I think it's just as important to assess people when they get here and decide, okay, sometimes you make a mistake, and how quickly can you pivot from that mistake. So I think you have to be sometimes you spend too much time finding a person, and then unfortunately you realize that when you found that person, they were the wrong one, but it was very hard to tell. So yeah, we can all interview and everyone's got their own skills for interviewing. And I don't like some of the interviews people do around, intelligence games and, code something for me on the whiteboard. It's not my style. I want to know about the human person. Do I think this is a human person that can be impactful and really, again, persuade and lead? You get that wrong sometimes. You got to be ready to move.
Yeah, and be a good fit,
all of the above. Yeah, absolutely.
John, we're just about out of time, but we do have one last question we always ask our CEO guests, and that's, what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their eyes on the corner office someday?
Yeah, I think, first of all, there are pros and cons to the corner office, and people should always be it doesn't seem that way, but when you get into it or when you think about it, it's true. The CEO job is a very lonely job, and you don't have peers. It is your neck on the line. If you aspire to that, think about what that feels like. You're not going to have other people to turn to back you up or to fix it for you. It's just you.
Right.
So, and I think not everyone has that perspective. And so I think, first of all, I always say that to people, like, recognize what you're getting into. Okay. Now, if that role sounds fantastic to you, if you really want to be the one who's in the arena, to use that expression, who's fighting the battle, you are responsible for it. It's your neck on the line. And you want to hire, I mean, again, so much of the job is hiring and organizing and inspiring people, as opposed to just, I have the best idea. If that really appeals to you, then you have to be intentional about that. You have to decide to take on roles that stretch you. You have to decide to take on functions even that stretch you. I mean, if I hadn't done 4 years in sales when I was at Microsoft, I'd be much less equipped to be in this job. If I hadn't had a stint doing effectively HR work, I'd be much less equipped to be in this job. So you realize that as a CEO, your skills have to be so broad, and you have to be willing to take chances on those sorts of things. And of course, you can't do everything. You have to, just the opposite. You got to figure out who are the people I really need to lean in on, who are the ones I don't. But being intentional and saying, I'm going to take on roles that will stretch my functional sort of knowledge and expertise because I aspire to be that kind of individual. You have to be intentional about that.
Yeah. Wise counsel. John Case, CEO of Acumatica, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
It's my pleasure, Brant. Look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.